Okay, everybody. So thanks all for joining today's call. This is the second workshop for the MSc research project. And by this stage, I'm hoping that everybody has their supervisor allocated. Perhaps you've begun to reach out to that person to begin to create the research proposal. And this workshop is really focused on helping with that process. So during this workshop, we're going to recap a little bit on what the MSc project is, look again at some of the dates and deliverables and deadlines that you'll have to produce. And then I'm going to show a couple of examples of projects that people have done in the past. We'll talk about how the project is assessed, and then just generally about some of the other helpful things I think are good to know for your MSc project. So just before we get into the detail, I know I've shown this slide quite a few times now to this cohort. I just want to highlight again that you cannot progress onto the project until you have successfully passed all of the top modules. And I know for some people on the call today, they're still waiting on results from the previous semester. And it may be that perhaps you fail a module on that last semester. And if that's the case, unfortunately, you won't be able to go through onto the project until you've resat that module and have successfully passed it. Now, don't worry if you're thinking, oh, I've put in work already into the proposal and so on. All that work will be carried forward into the next semester when you'll undertake your project. So if you do find yourself in a situation where you failed an element of coursework in the previous semester and you're not going to move on to the project, you will have the same supervisor and same project when you do make it up through onto the project module. Okay, so that work will not be lost. It may be that you're just a little bit delayed getting onto the project. So for those who do have resits, we just had the preliminary board of examiners yesterday. So for those that are moving on to the project that have failed a module, you will likely hear very soon, maybe in the next day or so, from the course director or the module coordinator of that module with the outcome of that. So please keep an eye out for that as well, and let your supervisor know if you will be delayed moving on to the project. Okay. Okay, the other thing I want to highlight, so we are now ready to begin the MSc project. And with that in mind, we do have a Blackboard Learn area that has been set up specifically for the project. And I want to make sure that everybody is on the correct CRN for that, because there's multiple instances of the project. And it's quite common that people perhaps register on the wrong version. So if you're taking the project this semester 2 in full-time mode, you should be on the CRN 46991. If you're taking the project in part-time mode, that's over semester 2 and 3, then you should be on 46990. Okay. It's really important that you're on the correct CRN, because all of the submission areas and the deadlines set up in those areas are specific to this semester. So if you're not on the correct one...
748.
What's that, sorry? Oh. So if you're not on the correct one, please let the course director or Shuaizhang or Glen Hall know, and they can arrange for a module amendment to be put in place to get you moved on to the correct CRN. As I say, it's really important. Just make sure that all of the submission areas are the correct ones for your module. When you do get access to that module area, you'll find there's some helpful links onto it. There'll be recordings of these sessions. So there'll be a recording of the last one. There'll also be a recording of today's session. And there's some other workshop material that you can make use of So there's one on what is research, so just how to get started in research. There's one on academic writing, and there's one on presentation skills. And you can watch those as you need to when you're progressing through the MSc project. So all of that material is available on Blackboard in those correct areas. The other thing that's available on the Blackboard Learn area, although most people have access to this already because I've shared it through email, is the project handbook. So the project handbook is a really important document for this module. It contains all of the detail that I've covered in the previous workshop and in this workshop, and in a lot more detail, particularly around the assessment and what's required for you from the assessment. It also has some details around the roles and responsibilities and how to engage with your supervisor, and important things around like plagiarism and just generally the schedule and some contact details and things for the module. So really recommend, if you haven't reviewed the module handbook yet, please take a look through that, particularly around the assessment and the rubrics and how the project module is all assessed. Okay, so the first thing I really want to cover is around the timelines. So we talked a little bit about this in the first kickoff workshop. I just want to refresh some of the expectations for the project and look at some of those deliverables just to make sure everybody's clear on the timelines for the project. So as we know, the project is a really important part of the course. It's an opportunity.
Hello, you are no longer audible.
Thank you. Not sure what happened there. So yeah, so it's really important part of the project, or part of the course is the project. And it's really an opportunity for you to investigate some particular part of the course that you've been interested in and discuss the wider context of that. So that includes things like the social, ethical, and legal aspects of whatever the technology is that you're interested in as well. And it's also a great place for you to showcase all of the skills that you've built up across the taught modules as well. And we communicate that obviously in written and verbal form. So we have eight-page IEEE formatted research paper, and then also a presentation to provide as well. And I'll go into more detail about those elements in a few minutes. I'm not going to dwell too much on the importance of the module, but it does carry quite a lot of what we call credit points, which means it has a very large weighting on the outcome of your degree classification. And we have seen the project in some cases pull people up into the higher band, so 60 or 70 plus, and we've also seen it bring people down because of that weighting. So it is very important that you engage well with your project and try to get the best result that you can, because it can have a big impact on the outcome for your final degree. So in terms of the dates, and again, I showed this in the previous workshop, we are currently, if I get my pointer, we are currently here. So just at the end of the previous semester, we call this week 0. And we're just about to start into week 1, which will be the start of the next semester next week. You'll see the next important date that we have is this date on the 9th of February, where you'll have to submit your project proposal. So that's why at this stage you should be engaging with your supervisor. You should be working with them to try to understand what it is that you're going to actually do in the project and putting together a plan that's contained in that project proposal. So it's due on the 9th of February, so around here. And then the green bars are the time that you'll have to actually complete the project. So for those in full-time mode, semester 2, you'll see you'll be able to work then right up from that date of the 9th of February across the Easter holidays, heading towards the deadlines for the submission of the written material on the 29th of April. and then the slide submission on the 3rd of May, with the presentations the presentation component taking place on the week commencing the 6th of May. So it's probably going to be the 7th or 8th of May, 7th and 8th, which is the Tuesday, Wednesday of that week, as the 6th of May is a bank holiday, and the university is closed that day. So if you can keep those dates in your diary, of the 7th and 8th of May, you'll be required to come in person to campus and present your research during one of those 2 days, and the schedule will be released closer to the time. Yep, so that hopefully gives you an idea. So you'll have roughly 14 weeks to work on the project, 12 to 14 weeks to work on the project, and to produce all of the documentation required for the assessment. For anybody part-time, I guess you guys are a little bit luckier because, again, you have a bit more time to undertake the project, albeit in part-time mode. The deadlines for the proposal are the same. So, sorry, if we go back. So it'll be the same date, the 9th of February, but you'll have the full 2 semesters to work on your project, with the deadlines being later on towards the end of the summer. So I just want to reiterate a few things about the expectations of the project. So the first one is that this isn't an implementation project, this is a research project. That sounds quite obvious, but I think some people maybe don't appreciate the differences there. So when I say an implementation project, this isn't just about building some nice software or an app or implementing some nice machine learning algorithms. It's about trying to apply research methodology to better understand whatever the problem is that you're researching. So while you might develop and implement some machine learning, for example, we're really wanting you to critically evaluate everything that you do across that process. So in order to do that, it's really important that you have a clear aim and objectives, so you know what you're trying to address from the outset. And that's really what the project proposal is about. You'll notice in the form we have an overview of some problem that you're going to try to address. To address that problem, we set out some clear and measurable aims and objectives. And those aims and objectives are guided by the academic literature. So at this stage, you should be engaging with your supervisor, maybe trying to identify some data sets that you might use for just generally for the problem you're trying to solve. Or you might be reading quite a lot of literature to understand what's the current state of the art. What sort of techniques have people tried to apply to address your problem? What are the shortcomings in those approaches? And then from that you build your aims and objectives. When you are putting together those aims and objectives, you should try to put together a strong rationale for every decision that you make. So again, for example, if you're going to apply some type of deep learning algorithm, you want to have a strong rationale for why specifically that type of deep learning, why not a different type of architecture. And it might be the case where you implement not just one architecture, but maybe 2 or 3. And the rationale for that is that, well, these are 2 or 3 common architectures, and I want to try to identify through my research what is the best architecture to apply to this specific problem. All of those decisions that you make should be supported through high quality academic references. And what we mean by high quality is that they're from peer-reviewed sources. So we're looking mostly for things like academic journals or academic conference publications that have been through some rigorous peer review process. And you should be using those references really to underpin some of those methodological considerations that you've made. So again, if we use the example of the deep learning, and I've chosen 2 or 3 machine or deep learning architectures that I'm going to try to apply to the problem, I'll want to have a number of references that have maybe shown that those architectures are good for the type of problem that I'm interested in, or perhaps they've shown in a different area that they could be useful, and I want to apply or investigate them here. And that's been underpinned by those references that I found in the literature. So really the project, how you would differentiate the research project from an implementation project, is all around the critical evaluation. And you must be critical and evaluate everything that you do, both in terms of the technical solution that you implement, but also how you manage the project as well, because there are some marks for that in the supporting or supplementary material. Okay, so I'm going to pause there for a second. Does anybody have any questions about the timelines, or just generally about the expectations from a research perspective? Okay, if there's no questions, then we'll maybe move on to the next part, which is about the proposal. If you do have a question, feel free to drop it into the chat and I can pick it up as I go. Or if you want, you can use the raise hand function and I can take that question either now or at the end. Okay, so the next stage of, oh, there's somebody has a question. Yep, go ahead.
Yeah, so drawing back to what you said regarding the project not being an implementation based project, I want to know, is it possible not to build anything at all and just do maybe a critical research?
No, so you still have to implement and build some software tool or do some analysis on an algorithm or on a data set, for example. It isn't possible to do just like a literature review or some theoretical research. So we need to have some sort of an artifact, which is usually an implementation of code.
All right.
Okay. Okay, so thinking about the proposal then, which is kind of our next step. So if we think, and I think I maybe have shown this before, this idea of trying to define your project idea and come up with those aims and objectives. And that can be quite daunting when you're starting a new project. So we are currently here at the start of this yellow dot, where we have some problem that we want to try to address. And at the moment, your focus should be on quite open-minded research, reading quite broadly around the problem area, trying to identify what solutions people have built to address that problem, and trying to identify what the current challenges or gaps in the research are, so that you can develop your idea and concepts of what you're actually going to try to do. So I think it's really useful at this stage when you're searching for literature to begin with some of the larger survey type papers. Sorry, I'm getting a lot of feedback here. Yep. So reading those sorts of survey or literature review type papers that have already done a lot of the work for you in terms of reviewing what others have done. So let's take, for example, if I was doing a project around deep learning for skin disease classification. So what I might do is start to search online for papers that have applied deep learning into identification of skin problems. Let's say we're focused on cancer, as one of the students that I'm supervising is. We might start to input those keywords along with the terms survey or literature review or review paper, and then beginning to identify maybe some recent reviews from the last year or two, maybe since 2021. And beginning to really read those papers in detail, see what sort of architectures from a deep learning perspective have been applied, what data sets people are using, what techniques people have used to try to analyze that data, and then see is there any insight into what the current challenges or limitations are in that area. And that'll really help us to get a good understanding of the problem, working towards this line here, where we have the deliverables and the research aims and objectives inside the project. So we're really using the research to inform our understanding of the problem area, what others have done, and then to put together that those aims and objectives. So that's where we're hoping to get to for the proposal stage. And then once we have that then, and we have these aims and objectives, we can begin to do the actual focused work where we implement the solution and we evaluate the solution, working towards the answer to the question that we're hoping to propose. So what is the best architecture, deep learning architecture to do skin disease classification, for example. And then when we come out here, we want to have an answer to that. And then at the end, once we do have our answers there and we're writing up our paper, we want to think about, well, what are the implications for that? And that's where the fish, the tail of the fish kind of comes into play. I think this diagram is also really useful because it gives you some idea of where your focus should be over the period. So you can see that we'll have quite a short period of time really to come up with those ideas and read the related work and decide what we're going to do. That'll be until maybe 9th of February, a little bit after that. And then most of the time will be involved in the actual implementation and development and evaluation of whatever we're going to do. So I think roughly 3 weeks for the reading, identifying the data set, deciding what your research questions are, probably somewhere in around 7 weeks for the implementation, and then about 2 or 3 weeks to actually write the paper up. Okay, so what I'm going to show, oh yeah, somebody has a question.
Yeah, so my question is regarding the aim and objective or stroke the reference for the project. So I would like to ask, for example, if my basis or my reference is United Nations Sustainable Development Goal, or Northern Ireland Sustainable Development Law, and this is majorly available on their official websites, for example, ni.gov website, and then for the UN SDG on UN SDG websites, which are not standardized journal references. So is that a good reference to use, or I still have to look for a journal to substantiate that, which may be very, very scarce? Thank you.
Yeah. So that's a good question. I think for those sorts of sources that you're talking about, so they're coming from government agencies like the UN or maybe some local government in the UK or Northern Ireland, as you suggested there, and that is I'm guessing why you're using those sources is to try to justify the problem that you're addressing. So if that's in, let's say, clean and sustainable energy, you want to highlight the scale of the problem by referring to the UN Sustainable Development Goal. And that is a really good source for that information. And I think would be a suitable reference for you to put into your report. And how you would do that would be to reference the website and then put a date that you access that information. And you'll see in the template for IEEE standard formatting of references, there's a specific format that you would have for referencing a website or a report like that. So yeah, that's totally fine. And yes, it isn't a journal, a peer-reviewed journal or conference, like I said earlier, but it is coming from a very reputable source. what we want to avoid is people using references from things like Wikipedia, for example, or I don't know, one of the other websites like I can't remember the name, you know, the data science websites where you might find some nice tutorial to implement code. But those aren't reputable references if you were trying to identify maybe 2 or 3 architectures for deep learning to use as an example. So yeah, for a use case like what you're suggesting, a government website or something is perfectly fine, but you wouldn't pick a website over a journal for other reasons. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, so what I want to do now is just show an example of a project that was undertaken by a previous researcher, supervised by Jane Zhang. And the guy's name's Luigi. He briefly talks about his project, and then he gives some hints and tips that he would recommend for people undertaking the project. So I'm going to press play here, and if you could let me know that you can hear Luigi okay, that would be great. Yeah. Okay, so some really nice advice there from Luigi, particularly around how to work with your supervisor, and plagiarism, something we haven't mentioned yet, but I'll come on to later on. And giving yourself enough time to write that final research report, I think, is really important as well. So I see a question in the chat about making changes to the proposal as you progress. And yes, that's totally fine. The project proposal that we're just about to come on to is not credit bearing, so it doesn't carry any weighting towards the final mark. However, it is an essential component of the research project. And its aim is really to get you engaging with your supervisor and to make sure that you have a clear idea about what you want to achieve during the project. So it's not set in stone. It is something that can change over time. Perhaps you think you're going to use some particular technique and it turns out that it's very difficult to implement. So you decide to maybe pivot into a different technique, or perhaps you originally thought you were going to use a certain data set, but for some reason that's no longer accessible and you need to move to a different data set. All those things are normal inside a research project, and for sure they can change as you progress through the project. So I think Faith has a question as well. Yeah.
Oh, not a question really. I'm trying to use the chat box, but it's saying disabled for me. I don't know why.
Not sure, Faith. I know other people can type into the text box, so don't know why it would be disabled. Anybody else have that problem? No. Yeah. Not sure.
Yeah, I have the problem too.
Oh, you have the problem too? I can see some people are already typing into the box, so I don't know. The only thing I could suggest would be to leave the call and maybe come back in. But it seems to be working well for some other people on the call. And I haven't set any restrictions like that. So sorry, I can't help. Okay, so the project proposal then, this is due on the 9th of February. So it'll come around very, very quickly. It's the next component of the project, and as I mentioned, it is an essential component. And you won't be able to complete the project without making a submission for the project proposal. So it's really important that if you haven't started to think about the project proposal and began to work with your supervisor, now is definitely the time to focus your work on this. There's a template for the project proposal. I circulated that via email. I think it was the link to this call the invite to this call had a link to that project proposal form. And it's also available on the Blackboard Learn areas as well. So if you log in there, you'll find it. And it's pretty descriptive in terms of what's required for a project proposal. So we can see there's a problem statement. So this is roughly 100 words where you outline what the problem is that you're going to try to address. What's the key issue, and what do you hope to achieve? So you can think of this as a really short elevator type pitch where you want to convince somebody that whatever you're studying is going to be a good thing to study. I should just highlight here, I've been asked this question already this semester. These word limits are just for illustrative purposes. So if you do want to write a little bit less or a little bit more for any of the sections, you can feel free to do that. They're really just indicative to try to give you some idea of how much effort or words should be put into each of these sections. I see a hand up from Vincent. Vincent, do you have a question?
Yes, thank you very much, sir. Okay, my question is on the proposal templates. Is the template just like a flow guide, or are we going to put in our text into these boxes as shown on the template?
Yeah, so if you could write your text inside the boxes on the template and then submit the template, that would be best. Okay. Yep, so you have the problem statement, and then you have a background research. So this could be a very short summary of the literature that you've read so far that has informed the methods that you're going to use throughout the project. So you can see here we're aiming for maybe 5 to 10 references. And my advice would be to maybe start with some of those review type papers, because they can do a lot of the groundwork for you in the initial stages. Vincent, I don't know, did you have another question? Was that from before?
No, thank you.
No, okay, perfect. Okay, so we've done our problem, and we've done our background literature review, and now we're moving on to think about the objectives, the aim and objectives. So you can think of, sometimes there's some confusion over what the difference is between an aim and objective. So you can think of an aim as the big overarching goal of what you want to achieve. So if we use that example I've been using kind of throughout today of trying to classify skin disease using deep neural networks, our aim might be to try to identify what the best architecture for a deep learning model is for skin disease classification. So that would be our aim. And then our objectives, and we can have multiple objectives, are the steps that lead us to meet our aim. So it might be that our first objective is to conduct an in-depth evaluation of different deep learning architectures that have been used for skin disease classification. And then it might be that we want to then, from that review, choose 3 or 4 architectures that we're going to implement to apply to this data set that we have. And then another objective might be to come up with some evaluation metrics that we're going to use to assess these different machine learning algorithms. And then the last bit might be to experiment with different fine-tuning of those architectures to identify what the best kind of final architecture might be for this problem that we have. So we're setting one overarching aim with, I don't know, 3 or 4 maybe objectives that we're going to use to then reach that aim. The methodology then, so these are the types of approaches that we're thinking we might start to use. So here, this is where you might talk about maybe a particular data set that you're going to use, or maybe you've found a certain library in Python that you're going to implement your machine learning in, or maybe your project relies on some hardware, you're going to develop like an IoT type solution. This is where you would put all of those details about what sort of methodology you're going to approach or you're going to use to approach your project. Ethical, legal, and social issues. Again, this is just to get you to really critically think about whatever it is that you're doing. And I would say here that you should do this quite broadly. So don't just think about the specifics of your own project. Think more wider context about what it is you're going to do. So if, like Luigi, you're implementing some robotic system to look after an older person at home, what would be the ethical and social implications of that? Although they may not be necessarily impacting on the project that you're doing right now, what would be the ethical issues if you were to implement such a solution into a more real world kind of setting? So this should be like a broad view in terms of the legal, social, and ethical issues of whatever the problem is that you're trying to address. And then project risks. So this is more specific to your own project. Again, we're thinking about these 3 different areas. So maybe, I don't know, maybe you're going to conduct some experimentation or collect some of your own data, and there might be some health or safety risks with doing that. Or maybe your project requires you to go out and install a sensor somewhere, and there might be some health and safety risks associated with that. Management risk, so this could be I guess more general about how you manage the project, around your time management, those sorts of things. And then technical risks, again, thinking about maybe you need a specific data set that you're thinking of using a specific data set. You know, what would happen if you could no longer get access to that data set, or maybe, you know, you're planning to use some hardware to implement some solution and you can't get access to that equipment at the particular time. Or maybe, you know, you're not so familiar with deep learning techniques and it'll take a bit of upskill. How are you going to mitigate that risk? So we're trying to identify the risks across those 3 different sections, and then we're trying to think about what mitigations we might put in place. So again, for the data set problem, perhaps you have a specific data set in mind, but it might be that you identify maybe 1 or 2 others that if you can't get access to that data set for some reason, you have a fallback to make sure that you can still follow through with some of the plan that you have in terms of your project. Okay, so that's the research proposal, which is due on the 9th of February. So you should be at this stage engaging with your supervisor, maybe looking with them at that project proposal and putting together a draft of that. I would advise to maybe send that draft to your supervisor in advance of the deadline, maybe, you know, 5 days, something like that, ahead of the deadline. Allow them to have some time to review that, and then maybe get a meeting or you know, some feedback on the proposal via email, for example, before you make a final submission. So I think that's really important as well, and that's something that Luigi talked about. Your supervisor is there to help you with the project, and that includes giving technical direction on whatever it is that you're working on, but they can also feed back on all of the main deliverables. So make sure you're building time into that for your project as well. So make sure you give time to your supervisor to feed back on you know, written work like this proposal or like the research paper later on. Vincent, another question?
Yes, thank you again. Okay, my question is based on the methodology and techniques. If, for instance, I have chosen a particular methodology or techniques, which I've also put down in my proposal, then along the line, maybe during the implementation of the project proper, and I decide to maybe make adjustments on some techniques or maybe algorithms that I chose earlier, I decide to make adjustments. Am I still allowed to do that?
Yeah, that's totally fine. Vincent, as I said earlier, you know, these things happen in research projects, that maybe you think something's going to work and it doesn't work, or you have some plan for some methods that you might use, and for some reason you need to change that or make some adjustments. So yes, totally fine if you want to change something that you've put in the proposal. This isn't set in stone. We do imagine that it will change over time. The aim of the proposal is to really get you engaging with your supervisor, beginning to identify what it is you're working towards and how you might get yourself there. So we're not expecting you to have all the answers, but just to be thinking about that, and it's totally fine if it changes. Okay, so the next step that I want to talk about is around research methods. So you may have noticed, if you were looking through the material in detail, particularly around the supporting material, it talks about having like a project methodology or a project life cycle. And I think that's really important when you're beginning any project. And in the past, there has been some maybe misunderstanding about what we mean by that. So I just wanted to kind of clarify what might go into that sort of section. And what we really mean is about a research methodology. So this is a general process or general research method and it aligns quite well with what we've been talking about to date with that fish type model, where you will have your problem that you're trying to understand at the top. At this stage, you'll be looking at the literature review, trying to identify what others have done, and maybe identifying what the gaps are in what they've done, or somewhere that you can try to maybe make some contribution. And from those, then we're setting out some questions or some aim and objectives that we want to try to answer through our research. Once we have those aims and objectives, or that overarching aim that we want to set, or the research question that we want to try to address, we can then begin to design the study. So deciding what methods we might use, what sort of study design we might decide on. And then the last ones are maybe less specific for us, but they do follow the same kind of logic. So we'll want to maybe choose some algorithms that we're going to implement. We want to look for a specific data set that we're going to try to apply these different methods on. And then we want to analyze how those methods perform. And then we want to write up our work in a written report. So you can, as you're moving through your project, keep a method like this in mind, and then think about how you might approach each of these in terms of your research methodology. And if you are doing a more AI type project, there are some more specific research methods that you can use. So this one, for example, maybe some people are familiar with, this is called the CRISP-DM model. It's a general model for data mining type projects. And it fits really nicely with a lot of the AI type solutions that we might think of building, where we have a problem, we identify a data set that we can use to ask some questions about that problem, and then we want to apply a number of machine learning or data modeling type techniques to try to interrogate or understand that data set. And again, you can use these different parts of this research methods to kind of frame the different stages of your research project. So in the supporting material, for example, you might have a section that talks about the problem. You might have a section that talks about the data set that you've used and what the variables are and where that data set came from and how it was collected. You might have a section on data preparation, so how you pre-process that data set for your modeling. You might have a section on the different techniques that you might use. You might have something on the evaluation criteria or metrics that you might want to use to evaluate that modeling approach. And then you might think about how, if you were in the future going to use this model, how you might actually go ahead and deploy it into a real world environment. So you can use frameworks like this to, I guess, structure the different stages of your project, and even structure some of the reports, and particularly the supplementary report lends itself really well to this type of a structure. The other reason why it's quite good to have a methodology, a research methodology to follow like this, is because quite often there are really nice research questions that you can ask at all of the different stages that might help you in critically evaluating what you've done, which is, as I mentioned earlier, the main thing about the research project. So if we take that CRISP-DM model, we've just kind of laid it flat here. We've still got all of our stages around problem definition, preparation, getting our metrics out, doing our modeling, and evaluating the performance, and then thinking about how we might deploy it. In each of those sections, then we can ask different questions. So when we're defining a problem, we can think about, well, what really is the problem that we're trying to solve? What's the current baseline that we can evaluate against? So, maybe again, if we use the example of the image classification for skin disease, maybe other people have tried to use this data set before. What techniques have they used? We can use those techniques maybe as a baseline, and then we can try to implement our own techniques and see how they compare to whatever's in the literature. So you can see the different questions that you might be able to ask. How do you tune hyperparameters, for example, when you're doing the training? Yeah, thinking about what's statistically significant, what is actually better or worse than one another if we're comparing methods, for example. So I think just a really nice research methodology that you can use, and very helpful to think about when you're trying to think of what questions you might ask as you're going through those different stages. And we have similar methodologies for other types of project as well. So this would be, I guess, a more standard one for an IoT focused project, quite similar to the CRISP DM, but more on a software development lifecycle. So again, we have a problem definition. We want to define the requirements for that project. So let's say we're building an IoT-based air quality monitoring solution. We want to maybe define, well, is that going to be indoor or outdoor? What sort of range is that sensor going to have? Does it need to have any set level of accuracy? Does it have to come in at a certain cost? Will there be access to different communications like Wi-Fi, or will we need to rely on some other more low bandwidth communication protocol, for example? So we can build up those requirements and then use that to design our architecture, maybe collect some data using that architecture that we've developed, evaluate how it's performed, maybe with some gold standard, and then think about again how we might optimize and deploy that model. So again, we have this just nice framework or methods that we can use to structure the implementation of our project. And again, this is just another example of that IoT infrastructure where we're using IoT here to collect data. We're maybe more focused on the data analysis and the modeling, and then thinking about how we can use that to get some real value out. And again, there's lots of questions you can ask as you go around that methodology. And the last one I want to show is just more a general software lifecycle development. So this is the other way that you can kind of frame a lot of the implementation work that you'll do for that supplementary or supporting material. So again, we'll be thinking about requirements gathering and analysis, maybe planning what that design might look like, designing what the architecture of the system or solution might look like, doing the software development part and how we manage all of that software development with maybe something like Git being in there to manage the different versions of our software. And then how did we test our software to make sure that it actually does what we think or what we designed it to do before we go out to deploy it then. So again, if your project is more a software development or sits better with a software development lifecycle, it's totally fine to kind of use this as a way to structure that supporting documentation. Okay, so the last kind of section that I want to talk about now is around the submission and assessment. So how is the project actually assessed? And as we talked about in the last workshop, there are three main components. So we have the research paper. It's worth 50% of the module. It's an 8-page IEEE formatted high quality research paper. The format itself is IEEE, and I would really advise you to look at that template in detail and make sure that you're using it correctly. Because if you're not using it correctly, and for example, you have quite wide margins, you can lose quite a lot of the space available inside those 8 pages. So make sure that you familiarize yourself with that template. And my advice would be to write directly into the template itself, and don't write somewhere else and copy and paste in, because it can be quite difficult then and you lose a lot of the formatting inside the template. I've made a Word version of the template available on the Blackboard Learn area. There are also LaTeX or Overleaf templates for IEEE if you prefer to use those as well. So you can look for those templates online. The second piece, so the second component is the supporting material, so it's worth 20%. And this is really for material that is relevant to your project, but you can't fit in or doesn't maybe sit quite right inside the research paper. So there are some key elements that we look for in the supporting material. I'll talk about those in a few minutes, but it's mainly for things around an extended literature review, maybe thinking about the software implementation and how you actually implemented and built the code for whatever you produced. And also a critical reflection on the ethical, legal and social aspects, sustainability aspects, and also how you manage the project too. So it's a bit of a place where you can reflect on what you've done and how the project went. And then the last part is a presentation, 30% of the mark. This will be a conference style presentation. So what that means is we will, over those 2 days in May, we will have a conference format. You will have a slot where you'll present you'll present your project to a group of your peers and other academics, as well as the people that are marking you, and you'll respond to some questions from that audience. In addition to the presentation, there's also an individual like Q&A type session where it'll be just you and your examiners, and they'll maybe ask some more detailed questions about what you did and why you made certain decisions. And that's really helpful, I think, for you as a student, because it gives you an opportunity to defend a little bit the work that you've done. And it also gives the examiners a bit of time to understand how well you know the project and really get a feel for what it is that you've actually done. So those are the three components: the research paper, the supporting material, and the presentation. So the research paper, is 8-page, no more than 8-page IEEE formatted double column research paper. That page limit does include everything, so it includes the references and any of the figures and so on. There is a very specific format for that paper, so it is IEEE format, and that means certain things in terms of how the document is laid out. And there may be penalties for exceeding that 8-page limit. So those penalties are normally a reduction in marks if you exceed that page limit by more than 1 page. So you should try to stick very closely to that 8-page limit. The format itself, we don't have any specific format, but there are some things that we're looking for and that we try to mark against, and you'll see those listed at the bottom of the slide. So we have abstract and introduction, so that's really where you're setting the scene for the paper, outlining what's going to be achieved. We have 10 marks for review of existing work. So this is your literature review and outlining what other approaches people have used. We have 10 marks then for the methods section. What are you going to do? What methods are you going to use? 10 marks for results and evaluation. So once you've implemented those, how well have they worked? How well have they worked compared to what others have done? And then 10 marks for discussion and conclusion. So this is, okay, so we've done this nice piece of research. What does it actually mean? What can we do with those results? What might happen if we wanted to do future work? And then 5 marks just generally for the presentation. So is it in the format that we've set out in IEEE? And are the references of high quality and used appropriately? So if this is your first time doing scientific writing like this, although I know these sorts of IEEE reports are used quite commonly now on our MSc program, that sort of structure is quite a standard scientific structure for scientific articles. And this slide just shows some of the things that you can expect to see in those different sections of introduction, background, methods, results, discussion, and references. So if you want to get some insight into how to begin writing an academic paper, I'd really recommend that conference paper from 2015, because it goes into detail about what those different components might look like. I just want to highlight at this stage that a lot of people do go on to publish their written reports. So I think we've had just over 20 publications now coming out from the MSc research project, and those have been mostly conferences. I think we've had 2 or 3 journal articles as well. And we do have 2 conferences coming up this year. This is the first one of them. It's the Irish Signals and Systems Conference, which will be held in Belfast on the 13th and 14th of June. Paper submissions are maybe a little bit early for you guys, so they'll be due 14th of March. However, if you did want to get involved, I think you could speak to one of the organization committee. Professor Huru Zhang, or Jane Zhang, is the chair for that conference. And the second conference is UCAMI 2024. So it'll be held in Belfast in December of this year. And the paper submissions haven't yet been announced for it, but it'll probably be around the summertime, June or July. You'll see a call for papers there. So keep those in mind if you feel that you want to publish some of this good work that you'll be working on during your project. So with the paper in mind, I also just want to highlight plagiarism and academic writing. So that 8-page IEEE formatted paper will be submitted through Turnitin, which is the university's similarity software, which means it will be compared with other sources that can be found online or that have been submitted by other students, either to Ulster University or to other universities worldwide that use Turnitin. So we do use this software to identify maybe parts of writing that have high similarity to other sources. So just be mindful of that and take care when doing your academic writing. For the project, there is only a one-time submission, so it isn't possible to do a test submission of Turnitin, and you won't see the Turnitin score in advance. So just keep that in mind when you're doing your academic writing. If you want to avoid plagiarism, I think these are 5 good, very simple rules to avoid it. So rule number 1, just don't copy. Don't borrow a friend's report from previous semesters and be taking text from that, or taking structure, or taking code. When you are writing, try to write in your own words rather than maybe some documents that you've found online. So if you're reading a research paper, try to write what they've done in your own words. If you're in doubt about the text, make sure you cite it. So if you are reading something and you're not sure how to maybe rephrase it, try your best and put a reference into the paper that it actually came from. Don't recycle any images, figures, or text. So again, if you're putting together a paper, don't be copying and pasting images maybe from other sources. If you are reusing an image, I would say try to redraw it, and that way you should be covered. You can redraw the image, put a reference to where it came from. And if you can't redraw it, then definitely make sure it's referenced in text. And the last one is, if you do want to use any material, maybe from something that you found online, or maybe one of your supervisor's documents, make sure you check that with them and ask for permission before you do so, and make sure again that it's been appropriately referenced. So the supporting or supplementary material then, as I mentioned, this is really a place for you to put other things that don't maybe fit inside that very focused research paper. And we are looking for 4 main areas here. So we're looking for a more in-depth literature review about the context of the research. So that could be, somebody mentioned the SDGs there earlier. This could be something that's a bit more in detail about why this is a big problem, what others have done to try to address it. Or it could be a literature review on specific techniques that you want to use. So let's say we're using, ResNet, for example, as one of our deep learning architectures. We might have a very detailed overview of ResNet in the supporting material about what the structure is, where it came from, how it's been used widely in the literature. And then in the paper, we would just have a review that's very focused on how ResNet has been used in the context that we're interested in for the specific application of our project. Number two, a clear description of the stages of the life cycle undertaken. So this is where our research methods come in. So we want to have a think about the research life cycle and how you've undertaken that research and that implementation. So think about how you structure that together. Description of professional, ethical, social, and sustainability issues. So here we want you to critically evaluate the wider context about the project that you've done. And then the last bit is a critical appraisal of the project. So this is more about how you managed the project, what worked well, what didn't work well, what you think could be improved in the future. So for the supporting material, there isn't a specific format, and it's up to you to decide how it is best presented. I would say most people submit another written document, maybe a PDF, but you could also augment that with some videos, maybe some demos of something that you've produced, a walkthrough of code, maybe some audio description of the data set that you've produced. And you can also augment it with things like coding repositories or GitHub repositories or notebooks like Jupyter Notebooks or Knitr would be the one for R. So it's really up to you how you format that. Yep, Faith. Yes, Faith, do you have a question?
Yeah, I think the next slide is about to answer my question. I was about to ask if the supplementary material has a format to go through it, and
Yeah.
if there's a limit for the pages the way the main one has limits.
Yeah. So there's no set structure. I have provided a number of examples on the Blackboard Learn area. There's two ways that people have done this in the past. Either it's a PDF document, that I would say that would be the most common, or some people have done more intricate online repositories like this one that I'm showing on screen at the moment. So you'll see here, this is more like a wiki, and it's got all of those areas we've talked about around the research methods. This is more literature review on the machine learning algorithms that were used and how those were implemented in code. And then there's something around data analysis, some extended results. And then I think later on, there is the critical analysis as well. So there's no standard format, Faith, and there's also no word limits. And the reason for that is because everybody's project is quite different, and some people might have or might want to show a lot of code. Other people might want to, just show a small amount of code and might be more focused on the literature review. So Clement is asking about submitting separately. So the research paper and the supporting material are submitted in separate documents, but together. And on that end of April date, I can't remember off the top of my head. I'll recap that at the end. But so these two components are submitted together at the end of April, but they're in separate documents. Okay, so the last component then, the presentation, I already talked about it being a conference style presentation. Closer to the time, I will be sending around like an agenda, so you'll know when you're going to present. We do recommend that you come to the whole of the conference, so we'll have 2 full days of conference that you'll be attending. We've got quite a lot of students going through the project this semester. I think somewhere around 55 students. So it's likely that we'll have parallel sessions running. There'll be lots of time for you to engage with your friends, to ask some questions, to also do your own presentation. And it'll be a 15-minute presentation followed by roughly 5 minutes for questions from the audience. So you'll have like a 20-minute slot that you'll present in. And then in addition to that, you'll have a 15-minute individual Q&A. So there'll be a smaller room set aside for you where it'll just be you and your supervisor and your marker, and they'll ask some additional questions, and that'll be roughly 15 minutes. So please keep those dates in the diary, and you'll see there the criteria again for what we're looking for. So the presentation is more about your knowledge of what you've done and your ability to defend that. Okay, so in terms of the submission area, so there's different submission areas on the Blackboard Learn area. You'll see one for the proposal form. So the proposal form needs to be submitted through Blackboard. You'll see one for the final report, which is the research report. You'll see an area for the supporting material, and there's also an area for the slides. So you can look in there and check those areas out. Yep, Faith.
Okay, thank you. The presentation, I wanted to ask if we'll be making a presentation slide, or we're going to be presenting the writing report, or we have to create a slide separately for the presentation day.
Yeah, so there'll be a set of slides that you'll use. Sorry, I've lost my directions here. 1 second. Oh, it's a way back. Yeah, there'll be a set of slides that you'll use to present your work. So it'll be like a proper presentation with slides. But you'll be presenting the work that you've written in the report. Okay. So you'll use, I don't know, you'll use the slide deck within the 15-minute presentation.
Okay, so we are presenting both the slide and the written work.
No, so you'll just present the slides, but the slides are obviously like complementary to the written work, if you know what I mean. So you're presenting like the methods, for example. The methods will be written in the report, but you'll be presenting the methods verbally in the presentation as well. Does that make sense? So you're presenting just a set of slides, but the slides are reflective of what your report is.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. Another question? Any?
Yeah, is there a template for the slide?
So again, there is a template on the Blackboard Learn area, but it's very generic. It's just a university template for presentation. So again, we don't set a formal template here because the projects can be very different. So somebody doing an IoT type project will obviously present in a very different way than somebody doing a more traditional computer science or AI type project. So we don't specify what the format should be like. You can use whatever slide template you like, but there is one available on the Blackboard Learn area if you want to make use of that. Okay, so the last parts then are around the mark. So the pass mark for the project is the same as any other of the modules. So 50% is what you're looking for a pass, 60% for commendation, 70% for distinction. And I want to highlight that at the moment, you need a mark of 70 or 70 or above, or 60 or above on the dissertation to be awarded the distinction or commendation. So what that means is you need to get both a mark of 70 on the project and a total average mark of 70 and above on all of the modules to be able to get the distinction. And the same for commendation. So you need a mark of 60 specifically on the project and a total average mark of 60 to get the commendation. The marking will be done by an independent marker and also your supervisor. So they between the two of those people, they will agree the final mark across the 3 different components. Just to highlight what that actually means in terms of the percentage. So you can see here, these pink ones are the top modules. So let's say this person has a profile where at the minute they have a 57.5 average across all of those top modules. And then in the project, they get a project mark of 65. Because the project has a higher weighting, 3 times that of the top modules, the project can actually pull up the average of the total classification. So here, this individual has a mark of 65 on the project. And because of that, it's pulled their average on all of the modules up to 60. And for that reason, then they would get the commendation. Okay. If, for example, they scored really highly here, let's say they were on like a 63 average here, but this project mark, for some reason they didn't do as well as they'd hoped, and this project mark was like 50 something, obviously that would pull the average down, and because they didn't get a project mark of above 60, they wouldn't get the commendation. So it's really important that you do well on the project if you're aiming for one of them commendation or distinctions. Okay, so just a last few things to know, the things that I think are useful to know for your project. So obviously at the minute you've been allocated a supervisor. It's really important that you work with them throughout the duration of your project. And it's really important that you engage with them. And I know everybody is very busy. You guys are busy. Your supervisor's busy as well. As up to you to schedule those meetings. So it's unlikely that your supervisor is going to be chasing you, asking you for updates. It's really up to you to push your supervisor to ask them for regular meetings, to get those meetings scheduled. And I would recommend that you're meeting with your supervisor at this stage, maybe once a week or once every 2 weeks at the least. The weeks that you're not meeting with them, I'd recommend that you send some maybe email update to say, these are the things I've been working on. This is what I'm going to work on next. And then in a week's time, can we have a meeting to catch up and discuss what I've been doing. You might want to bear in mind as well that there are some holidays during this semester. So the Easter holidays will come up. I'll recap on those dates at the very end. So you might want to just keep that in mind if you're thinking about needing your supervisor over that period, that they might be taking some holidays during that time and therefore may not be available. And yep, your supervisor is there to provide support. So make sure you push them, make sure you make good use of their time, and make sure you build in time for feedback on any drafts that you produce for your project. As I said, attendance is really important, and attendance for the project is logged through engagement with your supervisor. So your supervisor has access to a big spreadsheet that we use, and they log the dates of meetings on that spreadsheet. So it's really important that you're meeting your supervisor at least once every 2 weeks. And as I said, use that email update. If for some reason you do need some short-term absence, maybe you're unwell or something like that, if you speak to the course director, Shuai Zhang, she'll be able to direct you in terms of what needs to be done in terms of that short-term absence. The other thing I would say is we do run research seminars. The next of those will be next week. They run on a Wednesday, 1:15 to 2:15. And they cut across all of these different themes. So I think that's a really good place to go and just hear about other research that's happening in different areas in the university and also globally as well. So we have international researchers come along, talk about their projects. And it might be that you find something interesting there, even just how to structure an academic presentation, that could be really, really useful. So if you can make those, I think I would highly encourage you to attend. And the last thing I want to say is about ethics. So once that proposal is submitted on the 9th of February, your supervisor will be tasked to submit an ethics declaration. So in this declaration, they have to fill out some questions about how or if you're likely to be engaging with human participants. If you are going to engage with human participants, then it might be that you need to do an ethics application, but your supervisor will keep you right on that. So if you do think that you maybe need some ethics for your project, please discuss with your supervisor and see what they think and see if they have any ideas with regards to the ethics application. And the last slide then, so there are just some really useful books that are outlined in the reading list for this module, in particular the top two that are bolded, the Essential Guide to Doing Research and How to Do Research Project, a Guide for Students. Like really nice books just about structuring your research and how to ask questions about how to ask those sorts of research questions at the different parts of the methodology. So if you do want a bit of guidance in terms of research methods, I'd really recommend one of those two books or both those books, and those are available in the library. Okay, so that's all of the content I wanted to cover today. I think we're just wrapping up on time, which is great. I can hang on to the call for another few minutes if anybody does have some questions that they'd like to ask me here. And if not, I think everybody is free to head on and get on with their project. And I hope everything goes well with your supervisors. And I will be back in touch probably midway through the semester with an update on the schedule for the presentations. So thanks everybody for coming, and if you have